Quick. Welcome to Journey. My name is Jamie. I'm one of the pastors here. We are in a series called the One Another series. And I want to read you a passage from Romans. And today's fun because I feel like if Paul, who's the writer of this letter, he wrote it to the church in Rome, were writing to us today, I think he might have the same kind of sentiment. I'm going to pick up, it's just a couple of verses. I want to pick up kind of in the middle of his sentiment, but I want you to hear what he's saying regarding this next one another. He says this in Romans 15:14. I myself am convinced, my brothers, that you yourselves are full of goodness, complete in knowledge, and competent to instruct one another. I love this because it has this picture of us as a church growing in our maturity, finding our way, and he's saying, hey, some of you are called out to teach and to instruct. You've gained some knowledge, you've gained some wisdom. Please make sure you give it away. So when it comes to instruction, some of us, this happens, of course, through teaching, but it also happens in life on life. It happens through modeling. It happens through storytelling. It happens through interactions. It happens in your villages. It happens as you are going. Sometimes you just run into somebody in the public and they're asking about something. We do this for those of you who've been a Journey for a while. We do a text thing during the week, and it just sends out a text to remind you to kind of stay in alignment with the Jesus way. And many of you have said, boy, the text has come in perfect timing, and you've told this story, and what have you done? Really, there may have been like a little micro instruction as you're encouraging someone. Maybe sometimes it's even an admonishment, meaning you're challenging them to think about life a different way. Well, considering this idea of instruction, I went to the passage in Hebrews that kind of is a summary on what the Christian life is like. And I think the writer of Hebrews captures this pretty well. And then let's drop into a specific area of instruction because it's probably an area where we get tripped up the most. But here's Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, since we have come together as the body of Christ, or gathering as a church family, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. What is it that's entangling you? What's the thing that just is the obstacle? And I just love the imagery here. Like, what can you throw off that keeps you moving down the path, that keeps you living out the God-designed life? What's the obstacle that has to get knocked out of the way? Let us then, once we've shed that, run with perseverance. And it feels like we've been through a season, at times crawling as a church, wondering where we would be. Sometimes there were days that it was just take the next right step in front of you. But it seems as if there's something being birthed here. I've talked about this the last few weeks. There's this enthusiasm that God is just stirring up in our midst. And what can we throw off so that we can run with a perseverance, and certainly something God's been building within us, a perseverance, the race marked out for us. And so we as a church have been planted in a different city. Here we are in Brentwood, in this soil, in this dirt. How are we meant to serve this city? When we were in Franklin, we were always exploring ways to serve Franklin. Everything from downtown to festivals to people in need who just had physical needs, who were under-resourced. Now we're in Brentwood going, what are the needs here? And you go, well, Brentwood, maybe they have less physical needs, but the emotional needs are great, and their spiritual needs are great. Okay, well, how do we explore that? How do we find it? What's the race marked out for us as a church? And what's the race marked out for you individually? There is one. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And this faith word is a really important word based on where we're going to go next, because and I try to remind us of this as well. He keeps calling us to faith. Why? Because we have a proclivity toward control. Why do we have a proclivity toward control? Because we want to run life ourselves. We don't really want to trust anyone. In our broken state, we want to be the judge of good and evil. That's when we ate of the fruit, that's what happened. Judgment entered the world, condemnation entered the world. We're always into what's right, what's wrong. We have an obsession with it. We have an obsession with certainty. Jesus keeps saying, I want you to keep stepping into the unknown. I want you to keep trusting me, because every time you do that, you'll keep reminding that I am your provision. So would you fix your eyes on the author and perfecter of your faith, who, for the joy set before him, who's the joy? You and I. He found joy in being in relationship with us. he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For those of you English majors and lit professors, what's compacted into this verse is just anthemic. It's so beautifully written. And the imagery that Jesus sits down at the right hand of God, it's the image of authority. It's the image of God is sovereign. And this nurturing, loving God who exemplified self-sacrifice is the author and perfecter of our faith. So how do we walk in that? And where do we most often get tripped up? Well, I thought, why don't we just start with the first human beings and let's see where they got tripped up. There are a couple people named Adam and Eve. Perhaps you've heard of them. This broken state, eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that I mentioned, that happened with them. Well, Adam and Eve were cast from a perfect state of being called the Garden of Eden, and then from that, they began to have children. And so they're now living in that broken state. And so the first children to be born on the planet, 2 boys, their names Cain and Abel, and the curse is alive and well. The curse for the woman was that there would be pain in childbearing. The curse for the man is that he would have to labor at the sweat of his brow. Verse 4, listen to it. It sounds kind of formal, but listen to what Eve is probably really saying. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. And she said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. I think she really said it like this. Dear God, I brought forth a man. That's what I think, because the curse was alive and well. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Because she says, with the help of the Lord, like, I couldn't have done this on my own. God, thank you for helping me. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. So you have these 2 boys, and as is very typical in biblical literature, you have this wonderful contrast that begins to play. The firstborn, the secondborn. One is tending flocks, the other is working the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. Now, in the course of time is an implication that there was a natural gathering time marked out, meaning there was a time with which you came and gave your offering. That in this culture of humanity that obviously was in its earliest days in being birthed, but it carries on for a long time in the Hebrew culture, that there was a time that was natural in the rhythm of your life that you gave back to God a portion of what he had given to you in the course of time. So, and keep in mind, we're talking about the first family. Whether this is, there's arguments whether this is literal or whether this is metaphorical, but the bottom line is you have in the first family this immediate picture. The first 2 boys who are born, they're going to work and they're meant to give an offering. Off the top, that's just part of the rhythm of humanity from day one. So, verse 4, but Abel brought fat portions, and there's a but here. Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil. And there's a little, you can maybe feel like, it's really nonchalant. And Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil. Then you get to Abel, but Abel brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. Now you immediately can tell there's more going on here. I remember when I was a child and I first heard this story with flannel graphs, and watched, millennials were like, what? Anyway, just ask an old person. And they were like, I remember like seeing like Cain with like a corn cob and Abel with like a sheep. And I remember as a kid, I was like, man, I think Cain got screwed on this thing. Like it's not his fault he had corn, and Abel had sheep. Sheep show up a lot in the Bible. Like I just remember like thinking, what did Cain do that was so bad? But you get there's something not right in this immediately, because the Lord shows favor to Abel, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. Well, what's really going on here? And this is what I love. Again, from the first family, we already have an issue of the heart. That it's less about behavior, and it's more an issue of motive. This is very, very important for our conversation today. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Cain did not receive the approval of God, and so Cain is downcast. And then the Lord said to Cain, now isn't that interesting? Cain's pouting, he's raging, he's seething, but God, as a father, shows up for Cain with some instruction. Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? By the way, you can see that Jesus got it from a good place, the asking questions thing, because his father had been doing it a long time. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. Meaning, there's some practice involved. There's some habit forming involved. There's some restraint involved. You're going to have to work at the sweat of your brow. It's not just the toil of your labor to make money. It's actually the toil in your labor to manage it. It's painful to manage money. It's difficult to take care of your resources. He's saying, this is hard. You're going to have to work at it. Cain, verse 8, does he respond by going, God, thank you for asking me great questions, the greatest discovery, self-discovery. I now realize what was going on inside of me. Does he go, you know what? That's true. I need to repent. I need to realign. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. And then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? God asked so many questions. I don't know, he replied. Am I my brother's keeper? And on the story goes. And you see in Cain, what this story is exposing is, you see this, there's this resentful spirit. Cain is on the red triangle. If you were with us a few weeks ago, we did a little thing with triangles. Cain is totally in this victimization. And he moves from victimization to perpetrator. Like, there is anger, there is resentment, there is rage, there is violence. There is not a sense of humility. There's not a spirit of obedience. And it's interesting to me that the first sin experience described to us by the first two human beings born on the planet happens during a worship experience. This all goes down in the midst of an offering. When we believe that giving back to God is optional, we misunderstand something intrinsic to human nature. This is interesting, those of you who are historians. Even pagan societies felt compelled to give back in worship. This is true even around the country today. There's a human compulsion that says, I'm meant to sacrifice to the gods. If it's a monotheistic religion, to the God or to the gods. But there's actually written within the human heart an expectation that I'm not my own sustenance. It comes from outside of me, and I'm meant to give back to that. Now, in a pagan society, some of that comes from appeasement. Some of that comes from gratitude. It may be skewed because they don't have a true understanding of faith, but there is still this compulsion to give. What's interesting, it's really kind of a modern arrogance that presumes that we are responsible for the totality of our own sustenance. So when there's kind of an ambivalence or just a complete absence of compulsion to give back to God, it's because we look at ourselves and go, well, I made the money. I mean, I'm the one who busted my tail. Or I got into my own debt and I can't give because I got to deal with my debt. It's super self-focused, going, I'm the one responsible for it all. And often in that equation, our failure to give back just comes from an illusion that says all of this started and ended with me. But what did we hear in Hebrews? Actually, the author of your story is God. He's the perfecter of your faith. When there's an absence of faith and you go to control, you're preoccupied with yourself, and it's really hard to have a spirit of generosity. And so as you do a check down in the midst of our instruction today, would you go, where is my heart? You could argue that, well, when it comes to giving to a church, churches throughout history, many have not been trustworthy. There have been abuses of the church regarding money throughout church history, and which would be an argument. You could argue that. But if you want to argue whether or not you're meant to give your money back to God, you're going to have difficulty. Not just because the Bible addresses it at every turn. It's one of the topics that Jesus teaches on more than anything. But even a casual observer of social science sees that giving is central to society. We are called to give. We're healthier when we are in a state of giving. That's how we're wired. So if you go, okay, well, all right, how do I do a check down? Help me with How do I do a self-evaluation? A good barometer for how you view the money you manage is how you feel when God asks it of you. So in a day like today, and you're in a local church context, some instruction from Scripture regarding, hey, give back to God a portion of what He's given to you. What comes up? What emotion comes up? What feeling comes up? Now, maybe, by the way, it's a trigger for you because you were in a manipulative situation where people tried to get money from you. And it is your trigger. It's a place where you have a wound. And that's fair. And so that's a place you go, I got to have some healing there. I got to get on the green triangle. I got to do some good boundaries and so forth. And that's healthy. That's good. And after you do that, and you kind of get over, you move through that woundedness, or you're able to hold it here without getting spun out. When you listen to it from a biblical context and you go, God, this is me recognizing that all my provision comes from you. What's my responsibility in return? Then what comes up? Look at Cain's reaction. Cain's reaction is anger. It's jealousy. And ultimately, it's violence against the innocent. I mean, money can be that provocative. If you've ever had an argument that's included anger, you know what I'm talking about. Maybe you and your spouse, you started, maybe it was even over an offering. Maybe one of you was saying, hey, we really have to give back. And the other was going, but we're saving for this. Or we got to get rid of this debt first. Or we can't give until, or I actually don't care about giving to. And maybe anger has come from a conversation about money. Why does anger come up? What's it coming from? Where is our sense of responsibility? Where is our sense of stewardship? With Cain, the very first human born on the planet. So by the way, if any shame comes up and you're like, yeah, that's why I really do struggle with that. I feel this shame. But just so you know, you're not alone. The first human being on the planet dealt with this in such an intense way that he murdered the second human being born on the planet. You think there isn't a lot of emotion tied to this? Do you think there isn't a lot wired into our human nature? How we feel about money and stuff has a great deal of emotional attachment weight connected to us. And sometimes money can crush our souls because of the emotional attachment we have to things. We have been, Angie and I, of course, being in the season and being now planted here in Brentwood, we've just been praying, God, what are we meant to do in this next season? And so one of the things we've been talking about is maybe it's time to move to Brentwood. We've always felt that it was important to kind of live in the city in which you're serving. And so over the last couple of weeks, we were like, okay, let's do it. And we got a number of things going on. I got 2 kids in college. My daughter's now in college. That makes it 3. My wife wants to go back to college. That's 4. So there are a few things happening in my life at one time. So we were like, well, how could we simplify? I deal with decision fatigue anyway, so what if we can simplify? And so this is like the last 2 weeks. We're like, we're going to sell the house and move to an apartment. And it'll give us a way to get. We know Journey's going to need more in the next season. It'd be a way for us to give more. It'd be a way for us to simplify. It'd be a way for us to be good stewards. And I've always felt like, I'm a little bit of the romantic, and I have some emotional attachment to things. My wife, 0 attachment to stuff. So I was away for 4 days this week, and this whole thing kind of happened rather fast. So I'm getting texts. Sold the dresser, sold the couch, I'm like, okay, that's good. I'm not emotionally attached. We sold that. I'm like, did you sell any of our children? Like, everything is gone. I'm gonna get home. There's nothing there. And she's just like, it's just boom, there it goes. And I'm realizing I had some emotional attachment. It was kind of an heirloom for me. I liked that lamp. Take a picture of it. You can remember it that way. Okay. And I really mean it. I so admire Angie. She's just like, here we go. And she's up for the adventure. Let's go. And it has been challenging for me to go, what am I emotionally attached? And here's one of the things we realized in this process that I thought might take a lot longer than it is currently taking. Because I might not have a place to live next week. But in going through this, what I've had to do? Where are my values? And we've always said, our values are our children, experiences with our children, and it's being with our church, and it's carrying the love story of Jesus forward. Those are our dominant values in our life. And so if those are a greater value, then why do I want the encumbrances of stuff? And it's literally forcing me, faster than I wanted to, it's forcing me to evaluate what am I attached to. And I wonder how it exists for you. 1 Timothy 6:10 says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows." You see, one of the reasons that God calls us to give is he's actually protecting our souls. If giving isn't it's not a spiritual practice, you haven't mastered it, as God was saying to Cain, if you're not faithful in the offering of giving back, he's basically saying, be prepared to be pierced with many sorrows. Because when things begin to manage you, your stress level goes up, and the attachments become a higher value than what really matters. Because most of us, if you stop down and I say, hey, what really matters, you'd probably give some version of what Angie and I would say. Our families is high value. We love God is high value. But what gets in the way? What keeps you from sprinting down the path for the race marked out for you? And contributing even in a local body to go, hey, Journey's going to do this. But what's the encumbrance? What gets in the way? In order for us to exist in a trusting relationship with God, we must have a healthy understanding of the motives of our hearts regarding money and possessions. When it comes to money, our motives are most often exposed, as I said, when we are asked to give it away. So I thought I'd give you, here's 4 ways that we typically respond to this request from Scripture, from God. Number 1, we ignore it. So we're called to give, and we just ignore it. You stay distracted. Number 2, we resist it. We hear it, and we actually kind of feel this like pressure, like I know I should give. I know, and the should becomes a shaming word, and we can get spun out there, and we just resist, and it just creates all this tension. Number 3, we do it on our own terms. Okay, fine, I'll give, but God, you're going to owe me. Or we give and we do it resentfully. We give, but we're really angry about it the whole time. And there's this energy about us that we want something to go wrong so that we can then prove we shouldn't have given it. Or number 4, the author and perfecter of our faith is on display. And we obediently do it God's way. And we do it joyfully. There's the sense of going, God, I owe you everything. Nothing comes from me. My life is but a vapor that appears for a little while and vanishes away. This is a very short earth walk. How is my life expressed in my values? Is it stuff that's holding me back? You matter. Life matters. I want to praise you. And one of the ways I praise you is with my offering. This sense of giving to you from a place of joy and tenderness. When you see the contrast between Cain and Abel, you see that Cain gave, what the implication is, he just brought some of the fruit. And the implication is, even if you climb into the story, that he probably gave toward the end of the harvest, meaning he kind of surveyed what he had, and he went, okay, I've got this. Yeah, God, I'll give you this. I got a pretty good working knowledge. I guess I can spare this for you, God. Abel comes, and you hear the words that kind of jumped out in the passage, the firstborn of his sheep, their fattest portions, the best of the first of his flock. And this firstborn picture, which the first fruit picture is really the same term that's used for firstborn, but it's this idea of I'm giving because I know there's a foretaste of more to come. I'm giving you off the top. I'm leading out with trust. So the stuff is coming in. My goods are coming in. The sheep are being cared for. My first check arrived, and I'm giving off the top to say, here's my trust moving forward. And I'm speaking out, literally, so speaking out with an action. My trust is that more provision comes from you. I'll work at the sweat of my brow. I will be faithful and a steward to the work and the labor. And I trust that you will continue to bring what's left. And I will adjust in the mastery of my life, my spending and where I manage and how I manage my money. What's the result with Cain when it doesn't work? It's catastrophic. He's in broken relationship. Not only is his brother gone, we don't talk a lot about that. We talk about Cain being a murderer, but we also, he has to live the rest of his life absent someone that he would have at once played with and loved. And we sometimes paint Cain as like he's just an awful human being, but he would have been a little boy who played with his brother. He had to live with that regret for his lifetime. There's a sadness, a brokenness of the days that were lost, of what was gone. So that it's catastrophic when Cain stays in his place of resentment and rage and jealousy. And ultimately, what's really going on when you see the interaction with Cain and the father is his motives are exposed. When God's asking those questions, he's just trying to go, Cain, do you see your motives? Do you see your motives? I'm trying to take you below it to see your motives. And he didn't see it. And in the contrast with Abel, you see that there is a joy. That's what's coming out in this passage, that Abel came with this spirit of joy, that he gave up what he had for what might be. And what is that? It's a childlike trust. It's looking to God in wonder. He knew the one who was in control and the one that was trustworthy. So he gave up the fattiest parts, the firstborn. And the way this verse, if you could so sing the verse, if you kind of let it, there's this kind of, the verse just starts to ride. Like it's the confetti, it's the balloons, it's the clapping, it's the jumping up and down, it's the banner and the bravo. There's just an enthusiasm with Abel who comes to give. And I think sometimes have you ever seen somebody enthusiastic and you're like, oh my gosh, will they just tone it down? Stop being so excited. You have a young married couple, you're like, oh, stop, please, because you're exposing how I feel right now. I think that's part of what it is. There's a jealousy to it. When you see and so sometimes some of us have been squashed because we gave from a place of enthusiasm and somebody else tried to rain on our parade. Here's the bottom line. Look underneath the whole thing, and if you see this contrast with Cain and Abel, hear this. God doesn't want your money, he wants you. God does not need your money. He can handle the universe. He wants you, the real you, the unweighed down by sin and joyfully running you. That is often reflected in your relationship with money. John 3:36. And he who believes, and I'm giving the amplified version because it's kind of a beefy version. He who believes in, has faith in, clings to, relies on the Son, now possesses eternal life. There's an eternal spring flowing up when you're aligned with God. But whoever disobeys, is unbelieving toward, refuses to trust in, disregards, is not subject to the Son, will never see. You won't experience life. But instead, the wrath of God abides on him. And when you hear the wrath of God, hear this thing, that the disobedience that resonates back to us. That's what the wrath feels like. It's this ongoing disappointment. It's God's displeasure, an indignation that just seems to hang like a cloud. But what do we know about God? There's no condemnation that actually comes from God. We pull that up on ourselves out of our disobedience. In an action step of repentance, remember what we talk about all the time here. It's alignment, and that cloud goes away. The condemnation is something we pull up on ourselves. When we give our first, and what we give, our best, it reveals who's on the throne in our lives. Would you pray with me? Father, most of us here, it's not hard for us to wrap our minds around the fact that what we have comes from you. We are a blessed people. For those of us who have traveled overseas, of course, the rest of us who've seen images and pictures, and we see what it was like at other times in history and what it's like in other places of the world. It doesn't take much for us to see the immense blessing that swirls around us. So we acknowledge it and we speak it out. And God, would you hear today, on a day like today where we just get calibrated in you, would you hear us speak out words of gratitude? Thank you. Thank you, God. For you have truly insulated our lives. Many of us have access to medicine that heals us. We have access to food. We don't have to hunt and gather today for sustenance. We have a shelter that will protect us from the rain and the sun. We really have much. And Father, I confess that I know for me, and I imagine I speak on behalf of a lot of us, there is a sense still of what's not there, a longing for, a wishing for. And it comes to stuff, and it comes to things, and it comes to experiences, and sometimes it's just lust and jealousy. It's not faith, and it's not stewardship. We're not mastering anything, but we've become slaves to that which we really don't value like we do you. So we accept your forgiveness, and we confess that money has at times skewed our value system. And stuff has gotten in the way from us running with perseverance. So Father, would you cleanse us as you do? Would none of us walk from this place in shame? That's not what you've called us to. We have our identity in you. There's no condemnation that hangs over us if we'll follow you in obedience. And so, Father, would you lift our spirits, cause us to step forward in an action step of faith, trust, and then would new habits form in which we are faithful to you and the calling you've laid upon us. We know there are people outside of these walls. They went for a jog this morning, or they're stuck in their home, and some of them are on the verge of losing a marriage, of giving up on life. The stress is real, the pain is close. Would you as a church lead us to the brokenhearted? And God, for some of us, we will go as the brokenhearted. But would we go, even in our own struggles, even in our own pain, even in what we haven't worked out, because you carry us wherever we are on the journey. You love us where we are, and you use us. So God, as a church, take us to the brokenhearted, or bring them through our doors. Allow us to be a beacon of hope, to shine light through our brokenness, to lead people back into a deep and intimate relationship with you. And God, we acknowledge today that at a very practical level, sometimes it just starts with our money. Be our God. Guide us, empower us. We give you our trust and